Hi everyone, welcome to another Albums That Made Me. And this week we are going to be looking at this album. I don't know if I've spoken much about Roxy music on the channel at all. I really like them. It's an interesting band because from a period of 78, 79 through to about 81, well probably 82 when I actually picked this album up. They were probably like the most poppiest band I liked. Probably them and 10cc actually. So because most of the stuff I listened to was mainly sort of rock music. And I know, if you go back to their early catalogue, they are more of an art rock band. But by this point, they definitely got pretty poppy, and so Mav has just gone by. Yeah, he's graced us with his presence in the office. He was sitting up on my albums. Yeah, so after that distraction, yeah. So this album, where does it sort of fit into to my musical evolution? So up until I suppose I left school, 81, Roxy Music were a band you heard an awful lot at like school discos. So things like Dance Away, Angel Eyes, those sort of tracks. So stuff off of Manifesto and earlier. And like I said, I'd always, really liked the band, but hadn't really bought any of their albums. And then sometime around, I think, and I'm sort of backward guessing this, is I think sometime around 82 I saw this on video. And if you never checked out this film, one of the other things about it is it has a really cool soundtrack to go with it. So we've got stuff like Same Old Scene on here, which is what made me want to finally go out and buy one of their albums. There's an opening part in the movie where one of the protagonists is playing along, busking to, I'm pretty sure it's Same Old Scene, and I think from what I remember, I think they've got their amplifier in a shopping trolley. I think that's what they've got, and they've got a cassette player playing Same Old Scene. That's how it's been a while since I've seen the film, actually. I should watch it again. But it's got a whole load of other really cool stuff on it. The other cool track, and maybe I'll have to do a separate episode about Road to Ruin, although I don't know if that was my first Ramones album, thinking about it. I Want to Be Sedated was also on there. They got Babylon's Burning by the Ruts. Was there another Ruts track on here as well? And then this track, Damn Dog, which I think was it specifically written for I know the Manic Street Preachers covered it, and it's on Generation Terrorists, which I have. And I'm trying to remember with the music for this. I think it did mention somewhere here. Where is it? Yeah, I'm not sure. I thought I got the impression that track, and again I could be wrong, was specifically done for the film. Looking at the producers for it. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's what, when I do these series, what I like to try and pinpoint is the point at which, what sort of tipped me over with a band which were in my sort of musical environment and were there, I liked, but I hadn't really bought anything, even though by '82, I would have had, at least a year of some form of income, which I could have bought albums. But clearly, all the times I've spoken about music, most of that money was going on heavier stuff. So I'm pretty sure that whenever I bought Flesh and Blood, which, like I said, I think was probably '82. It was definitely, I went out and bought it as soon as I saw this on video. This came out in '80. Pretty sure the video came out on VHS in '82, '83 rental, and then that's when I bought it. Let me think. Yes, actually thinking about it, it must have been 83. Yeah, it must have been an early cassette I bought for the car. I wonder if I had it when we went down to. Yeah, see, it's now starting to come back to me, because I remember going on a road trip to Cornwall and having what do we have? We had Def Leppard High and Dry album. I think we had Road to Ruin on cassette, and at least one Cheap Trick album, and this as well, I think. Not this, sorry. Flesh and Blood. So it's got to be, it can't be any later than June, July of '83. Yeah, can't be any later than that. I don't think so. Yeah. So just going back to what's on this album, because I've digressed a bit, as is the point of these. Actually, it's interesting to see how you end up, like the prehistory of getting into a particular album or band. It had 4 singles on it. Over You, Oh Yeah, Same Old Scene came out 1980. So yeah, the album's like 2-3 years old by the time I buy it. And then around that time, I think I'd buy a couple of earlier ones as well. Like, pretty sure I had Manifesto on cassette, and whatever one of the albums is prior to that. I'm trying to think what it's called. Is it Country Life, something like that? But I hadn't really bought any of the early ones, and it doesn't get particularly good ratings. But I think it actually is my favourite Roxy Music album, actually. I mean, Avalon's really strong, I must admit, but that's one I more got into a lot later, which we'll come on to in a moment, actually. Like, there's an interesting sort of ongoing... I have an ongoing relationship with the Roxy Music. But there's some interesting covers on here as well. So we've got In the Midnight Hour and 8 Miles High as well. And at this point in the band's history, you've got Brian Ferry, Andy Mackay and Phil Manzanera, and they're using sort of additional personnel as well. So if you look at the timeline of the band, so we'll do that actually. Members, Roxy Music members, timeline. There we go. So here we go. We're in this period here. And Brian Eno was on the first 2 albums. There, so up to and including, was he on For Your Pleasure, Stranded Fever, Country Life, that's it, Siren. Oh, so they were inactive for a while as well. Because I remember Brian Ferry had like a parallel solo career as well. And I'm trying to remember when that actually started, because where are we? So solo year's 84, but he had some solo albums out. Where is it? Let's have a look. Yeah, These Foolish Things, 73. Another Time, Another Place. Let's stick together. Which one's that one gone on it? Oh, that's really, yeah. I really like this album, actually. Yeah, so you can see 73, 74, 76, 77, 78. So he's got this parallel career going on. And then you've got Roxy Music, 72, For Your Pleasure, 73, Stranded, 73, Country Life, 74, Siren, 75, then Manifesto, then Flesh and Blood. So Siren's the studio album, but what's the live album? It's Viva, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that one in a moment, actually. So there's a little sort of bit of, I suppose, historical background to the band. And then what was happening is I'm sort of listening to the band on and off, I suppose. And I think it's the band that really sort of opened up a crack in my music. So what had happened was I was in this interesting point, I suppose, in where I was really into, you know, hard rock, metal, and I'd been to a few gigs, and then I was also really into Cheap Trick, so like what people I suppose call pop rock, pop metal, actually at that point, I think, and that was mainly through a friend when I was still at school in the sixth form, and we used to spend some time in the afternoon when we had a free period listening to Cheap Trick while we were doing our sort of homework and various assignments. And I can remember listening to the Live at Budokan album like every week pretty much for almost like the whole school year, I think. And so it's funny, when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today when I was out walking, that memory really came back because I was trying to think of like other bands which sort of opened up a bit more of a sort of poppy perspective onto my music consumption. And, you know, the point of putting this is that album, and specifically Roxy Music, I would say, are one of those bands. And then an interesting thing happened. So, you know, fast forward all through that period, listening to basically, you know, what the band had put out from what was played on the radio mainly, and then the odd cassettes I had here and there. Sometime, I believe it was in, and I was trying to pin this down just before I started to record this, because I suddenly had this came into my head, and if that happens just before recording, I sort of do put it up here. I try and start off with as minimal amount of tabs as possible, and then use my music discovery tools to sort of jog my memory. But as I was getting ready, I had this sort of, again, like a memory flashback, I suppose. I thought, yeah, sometime, and it was definitely, again with this, I have to sort of line it up with other things that were going on in my life. So I know it was when I was still in the UK, so it can't be any of these. And they've repeated this quite a few times. I'll include a link if I can find it, because it's a really interesting one to watch. It was originally on BBC 4 in the UK. I watched it on digital. And it must have been, it's got to have been this one, I reckon. So sometime late in, 2008. So that would actually be right, because, and the reason why there's a connection to Spotify is I always have trouble pinning the date down, but I know I had signed up and was paying for Spotify before 2010, and definitely in 2009, and quite possibly in sometime in 2008 maybe, but how when I read back the history of the service, although it was available, or sorry, the firm was founded in 2006, the early days get a bit foggy, because I was using both Spotify and Deezer around the same time, and also I'd got one of the original invitation only things. I can't remember who sent it to me, but somebody did, probably through Mog, which is a music blogging platform I was using, and I had registered for the free service and then started paying fairly early on. And the reason why I know that is because I know I was leveraging the paid for membership because it allowed you to actually listen to the service anywhere. And I was using it while I was sort of travelling backwards and forwards from the UK to Canada. And that started sometime after, June of 2008. So my point is, between 2000 and 2009, I had Spotify. I also watched the Roxy Music Story, and then a little while after that, whenever I had access to Spotify, I actually went through and listened to all of the albums that were on Spotify, which was all the albums, and was really pleasantly surprised by, I'd never listened to the live album. And so, definitely check it out if you haven't, checked out the live Roxy Music album, because I really liked it. I thought it was really cool. And it's nice when you hear a band like this live. It's a bit like, if you don't particularly like with some bands, I used to find that back then they were a little bit too poppy for me. But then when I listened to their live album, because it sounded a little bit more, the poppy edge had gone off of it. I often got into bands that way. That was often a thing for me. If I was resisting on a band, I'd sometimes go and listen to their live album. But with this band, with Roxy Music, it was interesting to listen to their live albums years later, after I was actually already into the band. They also have this interesting run of albums, which is Stranded, Country Life and Siren, which is where their appeal broadened. But as I've said, and I know these albums are very well appreciated, and the early ones, but for me it definitely is Flesh and Blood, which I really like. But what was nice is, as a result of when watching this, is to go through and listen to all the albums chronologically, back to back to back. And it's a nice one. What had happened was, I think I did it on a weekend, and because of if you look at the discography, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 albums, 9 if you include the live album. So it's doable over a weekend. In actual fact, you can even, what was I going to say? You probably, even do it in a day if you started off early enough, and just have them on. But it was cool to do that. I noticed a reference to this book. I wonder why that's referenced there, because I have this book, and I bought it fairly early on. So I wonder why. Oh, I bet because of Brian Eno. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let's try and spread out a bit here, and I'm going to run some of this stuff. So if you haven't seen episodes before, these are my little tools for just letting me explore music, and so we'll just run them. They some of them sort of interrogate Last FM, as you can see here. Other ones actually you leverage large language models. There's a number of ones I've been working on at the moment which have links to Google Gemini. So we've got Gemini similar artists here. So I'm just, because why I like to use this is it's reminds me of bands where they possibly were a gateway band either end. So either Roxy Music was a gateway band into them, or they were a gateway into Roxy Music. And this is a really interesting list because I think all of these bands Yeah, I've listened to. Now, I'm just trying to work out the order. I was lucky enough to go and see Sparks live sometime in the 2010s when they played at a little club in Toronto. And they were really good live. Yeah, if you ever get a chance to check them out. I don't know if they're still touring. And it's so funny because they didn't look any different than they did when I can remember them from the 70s. And I really liked This Town Ain't Big Enough for the Both of Us. That was probably the heaviest track. I reckon it was that track that in combination with Queen, some of Queen's heavy stuff like Tip Me into heavier music. But Sparks albums are really interesting. Another art rock band, I suppose. And Japan as well. So yeah, I reckon that maybe, well, Roxy must have been a gateway for me for Japan, along with, there's like a two-prong attack, I think, because I had a friend of mine I used to work with who used to give me a lift to college back in the 81 through to sometime in 83, because I didn't have a car until about 83. And he used to play Duran Duran and Japan all the time. And so that obviously must have softened me up. But I'm pretty sure I then finally went out and bought some Japan albums and some Duran Duran albums after I finally sort of, started buying Roxy Music stuff. And Ultravox. Yeah, it's funny that. So then, Ultravox I remember buying probably around the same time. A lot later I got into Pulp and Suede. The Associates, this is, I had a, what was it, Party Fears 2, the track Party Fears 2, that was on a sampler for either Sounds or NME. And of course Television as well. XTC, I had one of their albums on with Making Plans for Nigel on it. What is it, Drums and Wire? And then Goldfrapp I didn't get into till a lot later. So I can see the interconnections here. When did I buy my first David Bowie album? It's interesting because I saw the live Ziggy Stardust one on VHS around the same time I probably watched Times Square. Talking Heads, I don't think I ever owned. I think I owned one Talking Heads album. As much as I sort of enjoyed them around the time of Psycho Killer and Once in a Lifetime, I never really sort of warmed to them. I'm pretty sure I saw the live one all the way through, where his jacket changes sizes. Suede, got into them around 94 or 5, and Pulp. Pulp was probably the first of the so-called sort of Britpop bands, even though they predate Britpop. So they're a really interesting one to listen to in association with, Roxy Music. What have we got? Here we go, Avalon. Oh yeah, this is... So with the Last FM lookup, sometimes it does get a little bit wobbly. This and this don't... maybe I need to reorder this, but just to clarify, this is not a track off of necessarily this album. It's just the way the table is. It's got the artists that, according to Last FM, are similar to Roxy Music, and then it's got the top album by that artist and then the top track by that artist, but it could be off of any album. But you're going to get some interesting things like the Best of Bowie, because it's just scrobbling data that people are playing on devices. And I don't know how up to date Last FM is now anymore, or how much people use it. In the early days it was used a lot, and I think it might have even been switched on by default pretty much in there was a strong, I remember there being a strong encouragement to switch it on certain services. And back in the day I had it running both on my PC and also through back then through Spotify was only available on PC actually, back in the early days. It wasn't until sometime until the 2010s where you could get it on a mobile device. But again, looking down this, the sort of usual suspects here. So not surprisingly, similar artist to Roxy Music is Brian Ferry. Transformer have that. Dare, So definitely they're a big gateway band for me into, what came after. Roxy music influenced so much stuff, both in terms of like new wave and then following on from that, like new romantic bands as well. And then obviously you've got other bands like Simple Minds, where there's something about their like arena rock, which had a sort of elements over time of pop in it, probably appealing to the same sort of people that might listen to Roxy music. Interesting playlist. This is just top 15. One generated from Last FM. Oh, Stepping Out by Joe. See, there's another one, Joe Jackson. I didn't buy Joe Jackson until the live album came out. So yeah, that was another one where I bought the live album, thought, oh yeah, there's so many cool Joe Jackson tracks I'd completely forgotten about, and then went out and had a bit of a Joe Jackson jag for a while. So yeah, that happens quite a bit. I've got Dare, I think, and I did own a greatest hits package they did sometime. When was it? 88, I think, around that time. Oh, look, the Psychedelic Furs. Right, let's see what LLMs are going to afford us, and nudge my memory here. So what this is a like a curate. I've created these wrappers, as in like a sweet wrapper, not a hip hop rapper. So yeah, I've created these wrappers where I take something and then insert it into a prompt and then feed the prompt into an LLM. So for this one, there's a number of questions to do with the evolution of art pop. Now with this, sometimes you get hallucination, which is why the temperature's on 0, is to basically stop any creativity in the response. But I found this is really useful again to act as a sort of external brain a little bit for me, like a second brain, and just to again nudge my memory about who possibly I and either maybe influence my homing in on Roxy music, or Roxy music then influence me to listen to. See again, here's a 10cc. So quite a few, artists that are considered to be on the arty side of things. I've never really listened to much Laurie Anderson, funnily enough. And interesting enough, Peter Gabriel, I probably didn't start listening to Genesis properly until about the mid to late 80s. I picked up a copy of, what would it be, something like Foxtrot. I had someone I worked with again that was a massive record collector, and they were a really big Genesis fan, and a load of us that sort of worked for the same firm when I was working in a lab, or in a series of labs in the same building. We used to sort of go to record fairs together, about like 4 or 5 of us, and I can remember them constantly going on about Genesis and their early stuff. And probably around the same period of time, I started listening to a lot of Grace Jones. And I've probably said this numerous times, those 3 albums that were recorded back to back at Compass Point Studios are really cool. There's so many cool covers on there. There's Private Life by The Pretenders, there's a cover of that on there, and Warm Leatherette by The Normal, I think it is, as well. A really good cover of that. Oh, here we go. Radiohead. So what other genre evolution explorations, whatever? Well, I've got two interesting ones, and what this one does is this takes a little bit of a retrospective look at a genre. So it tries to sort of glue a lot of things together to do with the evolution of a particular genre, the precursors and then the influences to the precursors. So this goes back quite far. And when I look at this, it's interesting because most of these bands I didn't buy albums by until after I listened to Roxy music. It's not that I wasn't aware of them, I just wasn't that big into them. And the Beatles I didn't really warm to until a lot later, actually. So the only albums, I would have bought around or prior to me buying the first Roxy music album would be David Bowie. Yeah, this is a classic. Yeah, interesting. I love this. This is one of my... Well, actually, I've got an interesting one which uses a thinking model. But, the first time I tried this with using the Gemini... So this uses one of the Gemini experimental models. And I'm going to do, after I finish this series, I'll do an episode about the code for this. This is running an HTML file running JavaScript and CSS as well, or using JavaScript and CSS. It's interesting as well, it goes back to things like Chuck Berry. I don't know if anybody ever remembers the track, was it My Ding-a-Ling, stuff like that. The Four Freshmen, Phil Spector, the Beatles, Beach Boys, Velvet Underground, David Bowie, Roxy Music, Brian Eno, From Here Come the Warm Jets. Because of course after this he starts to get more, slowly over time gets much more ambient. Not in Love by 10cc. I don't know, it's doing pretty well with the chronology here actually. And then this one, which is a modification, where it's actually using, it's having a megathunk, it's actually using a thinking model, so a Google Gemini thinking model to do this. And so it takes a little bit longer, but you get some interesting muses that it goes off on. I don't know if it's going to be that different than what came up here. But again, these are mainly backward looking, so this one is a little bit more forward looking as well, as you can see. So it sort of looks both sides of the divide, if you like, whereas this tries to bias a little bit towards the album and backwards. This one also has a handy dandy download feature on it actually, which I added, which means we can do this, which should make it a little bit more readable. Okay, can you walk me through the evolution of the art pop genre? Yeah. Velvet Underground, Beatles, Beach Boys, Frank Zappa. Okay, Frank Zappa and the Mother's Invention. That's a band I've never really listened to that much. May have listened to one album. I definitely should check him out, particularly the period when Steve Vai was in the band. Freak Out by the Mother's Invention, Sgt. Pepper, Hunky Dory, Ziggy Stardust. Oh, it's interesting it mentions Beat Poets as well. So of course it's going back even further now, so it's going, okay, precursors, the key albums. Okay, looking at the precursor bands, who were their influences? So then it starts really going back. So this is a real deep dive if you're really interested in sort of the origins of music, when I finally get to release it. And the good thing with this is, because this is going to be, when I push this out, it'll be a single HTML file. Anybody can run this if you have a browser. You just download it to your machine and double click it and away you go. Oh, well, actually, no, that's not true. You will need a Google account because you need to get an API key, because I'm not giving you mine. and I'll release this once I do my initial run of this series. Wow. So this really goes back to, well, I wouldn't say quite year zero, but you'll find this if you pick certain bands, there's certain commonalities they go back to, just because of if you're going back that far, you know, the genre wouldn't have existed anyway. So sometimes it goes back to a common denominator. It's a bit like if I ever run this particular one, and it's particularly on this one actually, if I run this on any metal genre, we pretty much always end up with Black Sabbath somewhere. So yeah, it's a revised list, extended list, 15 albums, and then what I do is ask it to create a playlist of one track from each other. Now this is where it can sometimes fall apart, even with it on a temperature of 0. As you go down this, you sometimes find anomalies. I did one recently, and I'm trying to remember the genre. It was a bit niche. It was like something like Danish indie rock, and there was one track where it had hallucinated, and it was close to what there was on the album, but it clearly had just made a mistake, you know, as it's auto-predicting the words. And so that's the main thing I've found is often it'll get an album right, more often, you know, pretty much. I don't think I've ever seen a wrong album, but when it's picking tracks, it'll either get, mainly what it'll do is get the name of the track wrong rather than pick an album, one off of a different album actually. And it's pretty good about doing a chronological one. And what's nice is for this one, and it might be in the previous one as well, I added this in, which is add anything to this album list that might be missing from the list to extend it. So, you know, the large language model is just basically extending it how it likes. So either it'll put stuff in there, or it'll, you know, think, okay, extend it, add it to the end. So it adds it to the end a lot of the times, but I've seen it build out in the middle in interesting ways as well. So there we go. That was an interesting look at all sorts of info. I was trying to think of all this really early stuff. Oh, this is a really cool track, yeah. Now I wouldn't necessarily say that listening to Roxy music intentionally made me listen to The Rite of Spring, but I am aware of that track. Because I think that's on Fantasia, isn't it? Pretty sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm familiar with that as well. That's a cool album. Wow. So much cool stuff. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I do putting these together. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.